People in that village liked to say the castle was cursed, but what they really meant was that it reminded them of things they were afraid to feel. Time, loss, and the quiet truth that some stories do not end when we think they should. She did not come to the castle looking for magic or monsters. She came because there was nowhere else left to go. The night air was cold but not cruel. It wrapped around her like an old memory as she crossed the broken bridge and stepped into the silent hall. The castle did not roar or threaten her. It waited. Dust floated slowly in the moonlight, and every step she took echoed as if the walls themselves were listening. Her name was Alina. She had learned to walk quietly through life, carrying pain without letting it spill onto others. Kindness had cost her a lot, yet she still chose it even now when fear pressed against her chest. She had lost her family to time and illness, not all at once but slowly until grief became a constant companion. When the villagers spoke of a sleeping vampire king deep beneath the castle, she felt something stir inside her, not terror, but a strange pull she could not explain. Deep below the castle, in a chamber untouched by warmth, rested a stone coffin carved with ancient symbols. Candles long melted into nothing circled the room like forgotten prayers. Alina stood at the edge of the chamber, her breath shallow, her heart loud in the silence. She had been told never to touch the coffin, never to speak his name, never to awaken what chose sleep over eternity. But standing there, she felt no evil. She felt loneliness. The Vampire King had slept for centuries, not because he was trapped, but because he was tired. Tired of ruling through fear, tired of watching generations rise and fall, tired of seeing cruelty rewarded while kindness faded quietly into the dark. He had chosen sleep as an act of mercy, believing the world no longer needed him. Alina stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she reached out. The stone was cold yet steady like a heart that had learned patience. When her hand touched the coffin, she whispered, not a spell, not a command, but a simple truth. She spoke of pain, of endurance, of how even broken people still hope to be seen. Something shifted beneath the stone. Inside the coffin, the Vampire King felt warmth for the first time in hundreds of years. Not heat, but meaning. A presence that did not demand, did not fear him, did not seek power. His long closed eyes stirred as memories rushed back, not of battles or crowns, but of moments when he had chosen mercy over wrath. The air in the chamber grew heavy, as if the castle itself was holding its breath. Alina felt it too, the sudden awareness that she was no longer alone. Her hand froze against the stone as a soft sound echoed through the room, the faintest breath drawn after centuries of silence. Then slowly, impossibly, the coffin began to open. And as the Vampire King's eyes finally opened in the dark, they did not burn with hunger or rage. They searched quietly, painfully, for the one soul brave enough to wake him. Alina met his gaze, her heart pounding. Unaware that this single moment would change both of their fates forever, the coffin lid rested half open, as if time itself hesitated to move any further. Alina could not step back, though every instinct told her she should. The air felt alive now, charged with something old and watchful. Her hand slipped from the stone and fell to her side, fingers numb, heart racing in a rhythm she could not slow. The Vampire King did not rise. He lay still, pale features carved by centuries of silence, dark hair spread like shadows against the stone. His eyes, open now, were not the eyes of a monster. They were deep and tired, carrying the weight of too many memories. When he finally moved, it was slow, careful, as if he feared the world might shatter if he breathed too hard. "Oh, you should not be here," he said softly. His voice was not loud, it did not command. It sounded almost uncertain, as though he had forgotten how to speak to another soul. Alina swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Fear trembled in her chest, but beneath it was something stronger, a quiet resolve born from years of surviving loss. "I know," she replied, "but I didn't come to disturb you. I came because I thought maybe someone should remember you." The words surprised even her. The Vampire King's eyes flickered, a brief shadow passing through them. For centuries, he had been remembered only as a warning, a threat whispered to children to keep them close to home. No one had spoken to him like this, without fear or greed, since before the castle had become a ruin. "A memory is dangerous," he said. "It wakes things better left asleep. So does loneliness." Alina answered, her voice gentle but steady. The chamber seemed to listen. Dust drifted slowly, settling on the edge of the coffin as the vampire king pushed himself upright. The movement cost him more than he expected. Centuries of stillness pressed down on his limbs, and for a moment he faltered. Without thinking, Alina stepped forward, her hand reaching out again. She stopped inches from him, waiting for permission. He gave a small nod. Her fingers brushed his arm and he stiffened, not in anger, but in shock. The warmth of her touch spread through him like light breaking through deep water. He had forgotten what it felt like to be touched without violence or demand. His breath caught, and for a brief moment, the powerful king of legend looked almost fragile. "Why are you kind to me?" he asked quietly. "You do not know what I am." "I know what you're not," she said. "You're not cruel." The truth of it struck him harder than any blade ever had. He turned his face away, jaw tight, memories clawing their way back into his mind. Faces he had protected, lives he had spared, and the moment he chose sleep because the world no longer rewarded mercy. "Leave," he said suddenly, his voice firmer now, "before the night reminds me of things I buried with myself." Alina hesitated. Every part of her knew she should run, yet her feet refused to move. She saw the pain behind his words, the fear of becoming something he no longer wanted to be. Courage, she had learned, was not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand anyway. "I will go," she said softly, "but not because you scare me, because I think you're afraid." The vampire king looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if seeing her soul laid bare in the dim light. Something ancient stirred in his chest, a feeling he had not allowed himself to name. As Alina turned toward the stairs, the chamber darkened, shadows stretching along the walls. Far above them, in the ruined halls of the castle, something else began to awaken, drawn by the same pulse that had opened his eyes. And the vampire king knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that letting her leave might be the most dangerous choice he could make. Alina did not run as she climbed the stone stairs. She moved slowly, listening to the sound of her own breathing, feeling the castle shift around her like a living thing learning how to wake. The silence was no longer empty. It carried awareness. Behind her, deep in the chamber, the vampire king remained seated at the edge of the coffin. He told himself to close his eyes again, to return to the long, merciful sleep he had chosen. But the warmth of her touch still lingered on his skin, and it would not let him rest. He rose at last, steadying himself against the cold stone. The world felt sharper than he remembered. Every sound echoed too clearly, every scent carried stories of lives passing above him. Among them, one stood out. Elena's presence moved through the castle like a fragile light, unfamiliar yet undeniable. She reached the upper hall when the air shifted. The torches along the walls flared softly, lighting without flame. Alina stopped, her hand pressing to her chest as a quiet fear settled in. She was no longer alone in the way she had been moments before. "You should not wander the castle," his voice came from the shadows. She turned slowly. The vampire king stood at the far end of the hall, tall and still, his expression calm but guarded. He did not block her path, he did not threaten her. He simply existed there, a presence both heavy and restrained. "I thought you wanted me to leave," Alina said. "I did," he replied, "and I still do, but the castle does not forget kindness, it answers it." She did not fully understand his words, but she felt their truth. The walls seemed warmer now, less hostile, as if recognizing her. Alina folded her hands together, grounding herself in the simple act. "Then why follow me?" she asked. "To make sure you are safe," he said, after a pause that revealed how difficult the admission was. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She nodded, accepting it without judgment. For the first time since entering the castle, her shoulders relaxed slightly. They walked together in silence for a time, their footsteps echoing in uneven harmony. Alina noticed how carefully he moved, how he avoided stepping too close as if afraid his presence alone might harm her. The vampire king noticed how she observed the world, not with fear, but with curiosity softened by experience. "What made you come here?" he asked quietly. She took a moment before answering. I was told the castle held a monster, she said, but monsters do not usually choose to disappear for the sake of others. His gaze shifted toward her, surprised. You speak as though you have known many monsters, he said. I have, Alina replied, and some of them wore human faces. The truth of her words settled between them, heavy and shared. The vampire king felt a familiar ache, the understanding that cruelty was not limited by form or nature. He had seen it in kings and peasants alike. As they reached the great doors of the castle, a low tremor passed through the stone beneath their feet. Alina gasped, steadying herself against the wall. The vampire king turned sharply, his senses flaring. "It has begun," he murmured. "What has?" she asked. He looked toward the distant hills, eyes narrowing. "Those who once hunted me felt my awakening. They will come not for me alone, but for you." Alina's heart raced, but she lifted her chin. "Then I will leave," she said. "I won't bring danger to your door." He stepped forward, closing the distance between them for the first time. His voice remained calm, but urgency pulsed beneath it. "You already have, and that makes you my responsibility." Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the promise of pursuit. Alina stood at the threshold of the castle, caught between the world she knew and the one she had just awakened. And for the first time in centuries, the vampire king faced a choice that sleep could not save him from. The great doors of the castle remained closed, not by force, but by a shared hesitation. Alina stood near the threshold, feeling the weight of the night press gently against her back. The world beyond the doors felt distant now, as if the castle had quietly claimed her attention, her breath, her courage. The vampire king watched her in silence. The instinct to protect stirred deeply within him, old and familiar, yet dangerous. Protection had once cost him everything. He had learned that saving others often meant losing himself. "You should go before dawn," he said at last. "Once the sun rises, the castle will no longer hide you." Alina turned to him, her expression thoughtful rather than afraid. "And you," she asked, "will you hide again?" The question struck him harder than he expected. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Hiding is the only way I know how to keep the world safe." "Or yourself," she said gently. Silence stretched between them. The castle seemed to breathe around them, shadows shifting slowly along the walls. The vampire king felt exposed in a way centuries of battle had never managed. Her words were not an accusation, they were an understanding. Before he could respond, a distant sound echoed through the night. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. The horn of a hunter, old and sharp, calling across the hills. Alina stiffened. "They're closer than you thought." "Yes," he replied, "and they will not stop." He moved then, swift but controlled, placing himself slightly in front of her. It was a small gesture, but it carried centuries of habit. Alina noticed it, and instead of fear, she felt an unexpected calm. Someone had chosen to stand between her and the dark. "There's a hidden passage beneath the east wing," he said. "It will take you beyond the forest by morning." She shook her head slowly. "Running doesn't always save you. Sometimes it only delays the hurt." He turned to her sharply. "You do not understand what they will do if they find you here." "I understand what it means to be hunted for being kind," she said, "and I understand what it feels like to be left behind." The honesty in her voice unraveled something inside him. The vampire king closed his eyes briefly, gathering himself. When he opened them again, there was resolve there, quiet but firm. "Then you will stay," he said, "not as a prisoner, as a guest." The castle responded to his words. Hidden lights glowed softly along the corridors, revealing warmth long forgotten. Alina felt it, the subtle shift from ruin to refuge. They moved deeper into the castle together, descending into a chamber that felt older than stone yet peaceful. The vampire king gestured for her to sit by the hearth, where embers still held a memory of fire. He remained standing, ever watchful. "Oh, you do not have to guard me," Alina said. "I know," he replied, "but I choose to." Outside, the wind carried more sounds now. Footsteps, whispers, the hunters had reached the forest's edge. Alina looked up at him, her eyes steady. Then whatever comes, we face it awake. The Vampire King felt the truth of her words settle into him like a vow he never meant to take. And as the first shadow crossed the castle walls, he realized that choosing to stay awake might change the fate of them both. The castle did not tremble when the hunters arrived. It stood still, as if it had already endured worse and chosen patience over fear. Alina felt the silence press in around her as she sat near the dying embers, listening to the distant sounds of movement beyond the walls. Every step outside seemed loud, deliberate, filled with intent. The Vampire King remained near the chamber entrance, his posture calm, his senses stretched wide. He did not draw a weapon, he did not bare his teeth. The power he carried was held tightly inside, restrained by choice rather than weakness. "They are many," he said quietly, "but they are afraid." Alina looked up at him. "Afraid of you." "Afraid of what they believe I am," he replied. "Fear makes people cruel when they think cruelty will protect them." The words echoed with familiarity. Alina had seen the same fear in the eyes of those who turned away when she needed help the most. She rose slowly, standing beside him instead of behind him. "Then don't meet them as their monster," she said. "Meet them as yourself." Something softened in his expression. No one had ever asked him to do that before. The sound of metal striking stone rang through the castle hall. A voice followed, loud and sharp, demanding that the Vampire King show himself. The castle's ancient doors did not open. They waited. The Vampire King stepped forward, opening the doors himself. Moonlight poured in, revealing a small group of hunters at the threshold. Their faces were tense, weapons raised, hands shaking despite their practiced stances. "You woke," one of them said. "The world will not forgive that." "The world does not need forgiveness," the Vampire King replied calmly. "It needs restraint." They laughed, but it was hollow. One of them noticed Alina standing behind him, her presence steady, unafraid. "She doesn't belong here," another hunter said. "Neither does hatred," Alina answered before she could stop herself. The moment stretched thin. The Vampire King felt the familiar pull toward violence, the old instinct to end the threat quickly. But he remembered the warmth of her touch, the courage in her voice. He remembered why he had chosen sleep. "Leave," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "There will be no blood shed tonight." The hunters hesitated. Something in his stillness unsettled them more than rage ever could. One by one, their weapons lowered, uncertainty replacing certainty. "Oh, this ends nothing," their leader said. "It ends enough," the Vampire King replied. Slowly, reluctantly, the hunters backed away, retreating into the dark they had brought with them. The doors closed behind them, sealing the night away. Alina exhaled a breath she had been holding for too long. Her knees weakened, and the Vampire King caught her before she fell. His grip was steady, careful, as if she were something precious rather than fragile. "Oh, you stayed," he said softly. So did you," she replied. For a moment they stood there, the weight of what had almost happened settling between them. The castle felt warmer now, alive in a way it had not been for centuries. Yet deep within the walls, beneath the stone and silence, something else stirred. The Vampire King felt it, a shift in the balance he had held for so long. And he knew that choosing peace tonight had set into motion a change neither of them could yet see. The night passed slowly, not with danger, but with reflection. Dawn crept toward the horizon in quiet shades of gray, touching the castle towers with hesitant light. Alina stood near a narrow window, watching the sky change, feeling something unfamiliar settle in her chest. It was not relief alone, it was belonging. The Vampire King watched the morning from a distance. Sunlight did not burn him, but he avoided it out of habit, a reminder of promises he had once made to himself. Centuries ago, he had believed distance was the same as safety. Now, standing in a castle that no longer felt empty, he questioned that belief for the first time. "Oh, you could have let them take me," Alina said without turning. "It would have been easier." "Easier does not mean right," he answered. She faced him then. Is that why you slept? Because doing the right thing cost too much? He did not deny it. I slept because the world kept asking me to become something I refused to be. Alina nodded, understanding more than he expected. Maybe the world does not change because powerful souls disappear when they are needed most. The truth of her words settled gently but deeply. The vampire king felt no shame in them, only clarity. He had mistaken withdrawal for humility, silence for wisdom, but kindness, he realized now, required presence. The sun finally rose high enough to light the great hall. The castle responded, stone warming, shadows retreating. It felt less like a tomb and more like a home returning to breath. Elena smiled faintly, surprised by the peace she felt in a place once feared. "What happens now?" she asked. He stepped closer, not looming, not distant, simply near. "Now the castle opens again, not as a throne of fear, but as a refuge, and I remain awake." Her eyes softened. "You don't have to walk this path alone." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not destiny or prophecy, but choice. Courage shaped by kindness. Resilience earned through pain. A human heart strong enough to stand beside an immortal one without fear. "Then stay," he said, "not because I need you, but because the world needs witnesses to gentleness." Alina felt tears rise, not from sorrow, but from recognition. She had come to the castle seeking shelter. She had found purpose. Together, they stepped into the light-filled hall. The vampire king removed the crown he had not worn in centuries and placed it upon the stone altar, not as a rejection of who he was, but as a promise of who he would be. Outside, the village stirred. The castle doors opened wide for the first time in generations, not with thunder, but with welcome. And in the quiet balance between night and day, legend and truth, the vampire king chose compassion over shadow, and Alina chose courage over fear. Their story did not end with a coffin opening. It began with two souls waking together.